You are listening to the It's Logical podcast, episode 13. What is sight? The rain was not the kind that falls in torrents, pounding the earth with rage. It was gentler, almost deceptive, more mist than storm. A slow, steady drizzle that hung in the night air, soft enough to seem harmless, yet heavy enough to blur the sharpness of the world. Every drop caught the glow of distant lamps, bending the light into halos that shimmered just out of reach. For most people leaving class that night, it was merely an inconvenience, but for me, it was something more. I was legally blind, and when the sun slipped away, the world slipped with it. Night was a wall I could not see through, a veil where shadows became solid and light became memory. My cane was not just a tool, it was an extension of my body, my eyes turned into rhythm and echo. That evening had already stretched me thin. It was Labor Day, when most people gather with family, rest from work, or savor the late summer air. Yet graduate school was not built for comfort, and my project management class had demanded my presence. I remember sitting through the lecture, aware that outside the windows daylight was draining away. Each minute made me more restless. I had walked the familiar route in, through the student center, across the elevated catwalk, and into the classroom. It was a route I trusted, the kind of path you can rehearse in your head, tapping each step before it arrives. But I also knew that returning after nightfall would be different. When the professor finally dismissed us, the world outside had already shifted. Students spilled out of classrooms into the hall, their voices filling the corridors like a rising tide. For a moment, I joined them, cane in hand, following the swell of footsteps toward the catwalk door. My mind was already rehearsing the route. Push the door, cross the bridge, descend into the student center, call my Uber, ride home. Predictable, safe. But when I pressed my shoulder into the catwalk door, it resisted. A metallic rattle, then silence. I pushed harder. Nothing. The lock held fast. A sudden realization hit me. Campus had closed while we were still in class. The catwalk, my lifeline back to the student center, was sealed. For a moment, I stood frozen. Rain tapped against the glass panes. Voices of other students grew faint as they moved off in different directions, some with cars waiting, others with friends beside them. I was alone in the dark and my path was gone. I took a deep breath and steadied my cane. Fear is a familiar companion for the blind, but it is never welcome. It creeps in at moments like this, whispering that you are trapped, that the world is closing in. But I had learned to answer fear with rhythm. Tap, step, listen. The cane struck concrete, the sound rising sharp and clean. Each strike mapped the walkway ahead of me. Tap, step. A wall hummed back a reply, solid and near. Tap, step. Silence stretched wide, signaling open space. Slowly, I moved away from the locked door and into the unknown. The path below the catwalk was foreign to me. I had never walked it before, not in daylight, and certainly not at night. My mind strained to build a map, each sound and echo forming the boundaries of this new world. The rain softened some surfaces, dampened others, confusing my ears. I had to tap louder than usual, pressing the cane firmly into the ground so that each note echoed with clarity. The rhythm became my heartbeat. As I moved, I thought about what it meant to travel blind. To others, it might look like fumbling. To me, it was strategy. I angled the cane across my body, sweeping side to side, listening for the edges of sidewalks, the corners of buildings, the sudden hollowness that signaled open space. My ears became my eyes. My feet read the texture of the ground, smooth pavement, then grit, then the slight give of wet grass where I strayed too far. The world unfolded in layers, invisible yet real. And then, I struck something unexpected. The cane tapped wood, then metal. I reached forward with my free hand and felt it. A fence, waist-high, slick with rain. It stretched left and right, cutting across my path. I paused, rain dripping from my jacket, and listened. No echoes of walls returned to me on the other side. Just open silence. The space felt vast, unbroken. I knew what that meant. The parking lot lay beyond. I laughed under my breath, a short, incredulous sound. Of course, the parking lot had always been on the far side of this fence. I had never thought about it before because the catwalk had carried me over. But now, the logic was clear. My Uber was waiting in that lot, idling with headlights I could not see but somehow felt. The driver had no idea I was trapped on the wrong side of a locked door, testing the limits of my independence. There was only one choice. I gripped the fence, cold and wet beneath my hands, and climbed. My cane dangled from my wrist as I swung a leg over, shoes slipping against the slick metal. For a moment, I teetered at the top, balanced between the world I knew and the world I needed to reach. Then I dropped, landing with a thud that sent water splashing. Mud streaked my shoes. My heart raced, but I was through. And there, almost like destiny, was the Uber, waiting just beyond. I opened the door, slid into the seat, and let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. Relief washed over me, mingled with pride. I had been tested and I had prevailed, not by sight, but by skill, memory, and trust in the senses that were mine. That night stayed with me. Not just because of the challenge, but because of the question it raised in my heart. What would it be like to see? Would sight have made it easier, or would it have made me careless, less attuned to the signals of space and sound? If vision were suddenly mine, would I be overwhelmed by its flood? Hundreds of cars gleaming in the lot, rows of shops stretching into the distance, faces and details I could barely imagine? Would I lose the clarity I had earned, the map built from touch and rhythm? I have asked myself that question many times since. What is sight? Is it simply the capture of photons through the eye, the translation of light into color and shape? Or is it something deeper, an act of understanding, a way of knowing the world? That night in the rain taught me that sight does not always come from the eyes. Sometimes it comes from trust, from courage, from the rhythm of a cane against the wet ground. Light has always been with us, and yet, for most of human history, its true nature remained a mystery. Ancient people saw the sunrise and called it divine, a chariot pulling across the sky. They watched fire dance and believed it to be alive, a spirit flickering with hunger. Light illuminated, but it also deceived. It revealed a world of color and form, yet resisted every attempt to be held in the hand. What was it? Where did it come from? How did the eyes, those fragile orbs set deep within the face, transform it into sight? Today, science gives us answers. Sight begins not with the eye, but with the photon, the smallest particle of light. A photon has no mass. It travels at the universe's ultimate speed, 300 million meters per second. It is both wave and particle, a paradox that baffled even Einstein, who once called it spooky. And yet, this ghost-like traveler is the foundation of vision. When photons stream from the sun, from a lamp, from the headlights of a car, they scatter across the world. They bounce from stone, from metal, from skin, carrying with them the signature of what they touched. The human eye is sensitive only to a thin slice of this spectrum, what we call visible light. It is a narrow band, nestled between the longer, invisible waves of infrared and the shorter, invisible waves of ultraviolet. Within that band lies every color we know: reds born of long waves, blues of short ones, greens balanced in between. The journey of sight begins as these photons enter the eye. First, they strike the cornea, the transparent dome that shields the front of the eye. The cornea bends the light, sending it inward. Behind it sits the lens, a living piece of glass that changes shape to sharpen the focus. Together, cornea and lens project the light onto the retina, a fragile sheet of tissue lining the back of the eye. But here, something extraordinary happens. The image formed on the retina is upside down. The lens flips the world as it bends light, so that every person, every tree, every star arrives inverted. Yet we never notice. The brain silently corrects the error, turning the world right side up before we are even aware. From the first moment of vision, we live not in direct reality, but in a corrected, interpreted one. Within the retina are millions of photoreceptor cells, rods and cones. Rods are the sentinels of shadow. sensitive to dim light but blind to color. Cones are the painters of the world, tuned to wavelengths of red, green, and blue. Together, they capture the orchestra of light and convert it into electrical signals. Each photon striking a receptor triggers a chemical reaction, a tiny spark in the dark. These sparks converge along the optic nerve, a thick cable of 1,000,000 fibers carrying signals back into the brain. Here, in the occipital lobe at the back of the skull, the real magic unfolds. Neurons fire in patterns, stitching together fragments of color, shape, motion, and depth into a single picture. What we call seeing is not the eye's work, but the brain's interpretation. Sight is not reception. It is construction. History shows how long it took humanity to grasp even fragments of this process. The ancient Greeks debated whether vision was a fire emitted from the eyes, casting rays that touched the world. Plato believed the eyes sent out streams that mingled with daylight, forming sight where they met. It was not until the Islamic Golden Age in the 11th century that Ibn al-Haytham, known as Alhazen, proposed the truth. Light entered the eye from objects, not the other way around. His book of optics changed science forever. Centuries later, Isaac Newton passed light through a prism and revealed its hidden spectrum, proving that white light was not pure but made of many colors. Later still, Hermann von Helmholtz, the 19th century physicist, explored how the eye focuses, how lenses bend, how nerves transmit. He built instruments to measure the speed of nerve impulses, discovering that even the fastest thought takes time to travel. Vision, he showed, is not instant. It is delayed, reconstructed, stitched together in fractions of a second. Modern neuroscience has gone further still. We know now that the visual cortex processes different elements of sight separately. One region detects edges, another motion, another color. Like an assembly line, each part contributes its piece before the brain integrates them into one seamless image. If damage strikes just one part of this system, strange effects arise. A person may see motion, but not shape, or shape, but not color. And then there is the blind spot. Each human eye contains a small region where no photoreceptors exist, the place where the optic nerve exits the retina. In that circle, we are blind, yet we never notice. The brain fills in the gap, blending surrounding colors and textures to cover the absence. What we call sight is already part illusion, part correction. The more science uncovers, the clearer the truth becomes. Sight is not simply seeing the world as it is. It is the brain's best guess at reality, pieced together from limited signals, filtered through memory and expectation. In every instant, the brain is not only receiving light, it is predicting what should be there. We live in a hallucination, corrected constantly by light. When we ask, what is sight? The answer is both simple and profound. Physically, it is photons captured by the retina, transformed into electricity, and interpreted by the brain. But beyond that, it is an act of imagination. We do not see the world directly. We see the world as our brain constructs it, and yet, even this construction is not universal. Some people see colors differently. What one calls red, another may call brown. Some cannot see color at all, living in worlds of grayscale. Others perceive too much. Synesthetes who taste sound or see numbers as colors, their senses blending at the edges. Sight, for all its apparent precision, is deeply personal. For the blind, the irony is sharp. To lose sight is not simply to lose photons, it is to live without the brain's visual map, without the illusion most take for granted. But in its absence, other maps arise. Sound, touch, memory. These too are acts of perception, just as valid, just as real. Science can explain the physics and biology, but the essence of sight, the experience of it, the meaning of it, remains something larger. It is not only light entering the eye, it is the brain creating a world. And that world is never simply seen, it is always and only understood. In the late 17th century, a man named William Molyneux sat beside his wife's sickbed in Dublin, Ireland. His wife was blind, and he had often pondered the nature of her perception, what she knew of the world, and how she knew it. From these reflections emerged a question so compelling that he wrote it in a letter to the philosopher John Locke in 1688. The question was simple in form, but profound in consequence. Imagine, Molyneux asked, a man born blind. All his life, he has come to know objects only through touch. A cube is familiar in the firmness of its flat faces, its sharp edges pressing into the skin. A sphere is just as familiar, its curves smooth, continuous, never breaking into corners. This man knows them perfectly by hand. Now imagine that one day, sight is granted to him. His eyes open, and for the first time, the world floods in with light and shape. The cube and the sphere are placed before him. Could he, by vision alone, tell which is which? Or would sight be a language he did not yet speak, leaving him unable to connect what he sees with what he has touched? This became known as the Molyneux Problem. At first glance, the answer might seem obvious. If the man truly knew the objects by touch, surely he could identify them by sight. After all, the cube is square, the sphere round, so different, so unmistakable. But the heart of the question is not about the objects. It is about the relationship between the senses. Are touch and sight interchangeable? Do they share a common language? Or are they separate realms, each learned, each requiring experience before they can be fused? When Molyneux presented the question, Locke embraced it. He saw it as confirmation of his theory of empiricism, that knowledge comes not from innate ideas, but from experience. In Locke's view, the blind man would not be able to identify the cube and sphere by sight alone, because he had no prior experience linking sight to touch. The senses, though both feeding into the mind, must each be learned separately before their signals can be combined. The debate did not end there. Philosophers across Europe took up the problem, each offering their perspective. George Berkeley, the Irish idealist, argued that vision itself is not innate, but taught, that even sighted people must learn to connect flat, shifting patterns of color into stable, three-dimensional objects. Gottfried Wilhelm Leibniz, the German rationalist, countered that the blind man might succeed, if only because reason could bridge the gap. The cube's edges and the sphere's curves, he argued, were logical truths, independent of sight or touch. For centuries, the Molyneux problem remained a thought experiment, fascinating but untestable. The blind did not simply gain sight in those days. Cataracts, injuries, or congenital blindness had no cure. The question remained a philosophical game. That changed in the modern era. With advances in surgery and medicine, cases arose of individuals who had been blind from birth or early childhood, then later had their vision restored. At last, the experiment could be tested, not in theory, but in reality. The results, perhaps surprisingly, leaned toward Locke. Most newly sighted individuals could not immediately connect their tactile knowledge to visual recognition. Presented with familiar objects, they could not match what they saw to what they once knew by touch. A cube in the hand did not instantly become a cube to the eye. Instead, vision was chaos. Flat shapes, colors, lines without depth or meaning. Only with time, days, weeks, months, did the brain learn to reconcile the two senses. The cube touched became the cube seen. A landmark study in 2011, conducted in India, provided some of the clearest evidence. Researchers worked with children who had been born blind due to cataracts, then received corrective surgery. When shown objects they knew by touch, the children could not initially identify them by sight alone. But within a week, their accuracy improved dramatically. The brain, once given the chance, began to integrate touch and sight, building the bridge that Molyneux's question had hinted at centuries earlier. This discovery carried profound implications. It confirmed that sight is not an automatic window into reality. It is a skill, a language, something learned. The eyes may deliver light, but the brain must be taught to interpret it. Experience is not just helpful, it is essential. And yet, the Molyneux problem continues to echo in philosophy, psychology, and neuroscience. It asks us to confront the limits of our senses, to recognize that perception is not merely reception, but translation. What does it mean to see an object? Is it to grasp its physical form, or is it to connect that form with memory, with other senses, with meaning itself? For the blind, the thought experiment is not abstract. It touches lived reality. Many who gain sight after a lifetime of blindness describe the first moments as overwhelming, even disappointing. The world does not rush in with clarity, it floods in with confusion. Vision without training is not clarity, it is chaos. A swirl of color, a blur of motion, surfaces that seem to float without anchor. Touch is grounded, certain, known. Sight must earn its way into understanding. What Molyneux revealed, and what modern science has confirmed, is that the senses are not interchangeable. They are not merely different doors into the same room. They are distinct languages, each with its own grammar, each requiring its own education. The brain is the translator, weaving them together, but only after time and experience. And so, the blind man of Molyneux's imagination could not instantly name the cube and sphere by sight. But given days, weeks, months, given experience, he could. The senses would converge, as they always do, into the unified perception we call reality. The Molyneux problem endures not because of its answer, but because of its implications. It reminds us that perception is not given, it is built. It is not the world itself, but the world as we learn it. Sight, touch, sound, smell, taste, each is a thread, and only through weaving do we create the tapestry of experience. And perhaps in asking whether the blind man could see, Molyneux asked a deeper question still. How much of what we call seeing is learned, and how much is simply assumed? There is a common misconception that blindness is simply an absence, that without sight, the world is dark, empty, incomplete. But this is a misunderstanding born from the perspective of the sighted. To those who live without vision, the world is not a void. It is full, textured, rich with information, only carried through different channels. Sight is one language of perception, but not the only one. The blind construct worlds of equal depth and detail, woven not of photons but of sound, touch, balance, and memory. The body itself provides the first map. Proprioception, the awareness of where one's limbs are in space, forms the foundation of navigation. Even with eyes closed, a person knows if their arm is raised, if their foot is stepping, if their head is tilted. This sense emerges not from sight, but from nerves embedded in muscles, tendons, and joints. For the blind, proprioception sharpens into a skill, allowing them to walk with confidence, to reach for objects, to move through rooms without hesitation. It is the compass that orients the body when light offers no guide. But proprioception is only the beginning. Sound, too, becomes a form of sight. Every tap of a cane, every footstep, every shifting echo is a piece of data. Blind travelers learn to interpret these signals instinctively, often without conscious effort. A cane striking against tile sounds different from a cane tapping concrete, which sounds different still from one brushing against grass. The angle and sharpness of the sound reveal distance, texture, and boundary. Some take this further into the realm of echolocation. By clicking the tongue, snapping fingers, or tapping the cane deliberately, the blind can create pulses of sound that bounce off surrounding objects. The returning echoes paint outlines of the environment, a wall looming near, a doorway opening ahead, a pole interrupting the path. To a practiced ear, these echoes are as vivid as shadows on a wall. One striking example is Daniel Kish, a man often called the real-life Batman. Blind since infancy, Kish developed a form of echolocation so refined that he can ride a bicycle through city streets, avoiding obstacles by interpreting the clicks of his tongue against the air. To him, each click is a sonar pulse, rebounding in patterns his brain interprets into a three-dimensional map. Buildings, cars, trees, each returns a different echo. He does not merely sense them, he perceives them. His world is alive with structure, not in color, but in resonance. Echolocation has been studied in neuroscience, revealing that the brains of those who master it undergo adaptation. In blind echolocators, the visual cortex, the very region normally dedicated to sight, is activated by sound. The brain, flexible and resourceful, rewires itself to turn echoes into images. It is as though sound becomes sight, translated in the same cortical language. Beyond echolocation lies flash sonar, an even more advanced form. While echolocation provides general awareness, flash sonar allows for detail. Skilled practitioners can distinguish not only that an object exists, but what it might be. A chair gives back one signature, a table another. The echoes of a tree differ from the echoes of a lamppost. With training, some can even sketch the outlines of objects they see with sound, their drawings eerily accurate to their shapes. But this is not all. The blind often describe a multidimensional awareness of space that surpasses the narrow forward-facing field of vision. Sound is not restricted to what lies ahead. It surrounds. It comes from behind, above, below. A bird calling in the trees maps itself high and distant. Footsteps on stairs echo upward. A passing car shifts from left to right in real time, traced by the Doppler effect of its engine. The blind experience a panorama of sound that the sighted, focused visually, often ignore. Touch, too, becomes vision. Fingers reading Braille are not simply skimming dots. They are translating patterns into language, as vivid as print on a page. Hands trailing along a wall can measure its material, its height, its direction. Air currents brushing against the skin reveal whether a door has opened nearby. Even temperature carries meaning. Sunlight warms one side of the body. A draft whispers of an opening ahead. Some describe the world of blindness as more three-dimensional than that of sight. With vision, everything is framed forward. The eyes give detail, but only in the cone before them. For the blind, space is spherical, experienced in all directions at once. Hearing brings depth, touch brings texture, proprioception brings orientation. The result is not darkness, but a different kind of sight, one that is not bound by direction, but by presence. This richness, however, is often hidden from the sighted. The assumption is that blindness equals loss. But blind individuals often speak of gaining a kind of perception others cannot imagine. Some say they see voices as locations in space, each person anchored not by face but by tone and position. Others describe their homes not in visual terms, but as a network of paths, textures, and sounds, maps of movement rather than maps of shape. It is worth noting, too, the role of memory. For the blind, memory is not passive, it is active architecture. Every path traveled, every room entered, is stored in detail. When navigating, the mind recalls these maps, overlaying them onto current sensory input. A blind traveler walking through a city may know, without hesitation, where a curb will rise, where a bench will appear, where an alley will open, not because they see it, but because they remember it. The brain, combining memory with real-time input, creates a dynamic model of the world, updated with every step. Science has confirmed what blind people have always known. The brain is plastic, adaptable, capable of incredible transformation. In those who are blind, regions of the brain typically reserved for vision are often repurposed. The occipital lobe may process sound, touch, or language. This rewiring explains why some blind individuals excel in echolocation, music, or spatial memory. The absence of sight does not diminish the brain's potential, it redirects it. And yet, perhaps the most profound truth is this: blindness reveals the limits of vision itself. Sighted people often believe they perceive the world as it is, but they too live in partial perception, filtered by focus, dulled by habit. They look but do not always see. They miss details, overlook sounds, forget touch. The blind, forced to rely on these other senses, demonstrate how much more there is to perception than light alone. In this way, blindness is not a void but an expansion. It is proof that sight is only one way of knowing the world. Proprioception, echolocation, flash sonar, touch, memory, each is a lens, each is a form of vision. Together they remind us that seeing is not confined to the eyes. It is the act of perceiving, of comprehending, of orienting oneself in the vast and complicated world. And sometimes it is the blind who see more deeply. There is a strange irony in the stories of those who gain sight after a lifetime of blindness. The expectation, especially among the sighted, is that the moment of restored vision must be a miracle, an awakening, a revelation beyond imagination. The blind man sees for the first time, and surely the world bursts open with color, detail, and wonder. But the truth in many cases is far more complex, and at times, far more disappointing. Accounts from newly sighted individuals often describe their first visual experiences as overwhelming, confusing, even frightening. Instead of clarity, there is chaos. Light floods in without meaning. Shapes blur together. Colors exist without names or categories. Depth perception, something learned over years of visual experience, is absent. Objects appear flat, like drawings on paper. A ball does not look round. It looks like a circle hovering in space. A cube does not reveal itself as solid. It is simply a square with strange shadows. For someone who has lived by touch, by sound, by the certainty of proprioception, vision feels unreliable. A chair touched is known immediately. 4 legs, a seat, a back. The same chair seen for the first time is confusing. A jumble of lines, colors, and edges with no immediate indication of its function. The blind man's fingers tell him the truth. His new eyes tell him only possibilities. This sense of disappointment has been documented in research and in memoirs. In the early 20th century, cases of cataract surgeries that restored sight often revealed not joy, but distress. Some patients, unable to reconcile their new vision with their other senses, chose to close their eyes, retreating into the world they knew. Others required months, even years, before their sight became more useful than their blindness. Why is this so? The answer lies in the nature of perception itself. Vision is not just a physical act, it is a learned skill. Sighted children spend years unconsciously training their brains to interpret the patterns of light into depth, distance, and identity. A ball rolling across the floor is not understood instantly. It is built from countless moments of experience until the brain knows without effort that roundness equals roll, that shadow equals depth, that shape equals function. Without that training, sight is like a foreign language spoken fluently all around you, but undecipherable to your ear. In contrast, blindness offers its own form of mastery. The blind often describe their awareness of space as three-dimensional in a way vision cannot match. Sound wraps around them, behind and above, below and beside. The rustle of leaves locates the trees. The hum of air conditioners pins buildings in space. Footsteps approaching from behind are not surprises, but part of the environment. Vision narrows perception to what lies ahead. Sound expands it to all directions. Even in the sighted, vision is more limited than we admit. The field of view is only about 210 degrees horizontally, and within that, only a narrow cone of about 2 degrees is in sharp focus. Everything outside the center is blurred, vague, filled in by the brain's assumptions. The blind, trained to use hearing and touch, often experience a richer, fuller sphere of awareness than those who rely solely on sight. This is the paradox of vision. It expands the detail of the world, but contracts its scope. You may see color, but you lose the intimacy of touch. You may see detail ahead, but you ignore what is behind. Blindness, in its adaptation, can create a sense of space that is broader, more immersive. Sight, in its precision, narrows the frame. For someone who has lived blind, then, sight can feel like a downgrade. The three-dimensional panorama shrinks into a forward-facing window. The full-body awareness is replaced by a flood of unfamiliar data that overwhelms but does not yet inform. It is little wonder that some who gain sight mourn the loss of their old world, even as they struggle to embrace the new. But perhaps this paradox teaches us something deeper about the nature of perception itself. No sense is complete. Each offers both gifts and limits. Sight dazzles with detail, but it blinds us to the richness of other signals. Sound surrounds, but it cannot capture color. Touch grounds, but it cannot map distance. True perception lies not in one sense, but in the weaving together of them all. For those who have never seen, their perception is no less real, no less profound. It is simply different, built from echoes, textures, and memory instead of photons. And for those who gain sight after blindness, the disappointment is not proof of sight's inadequacy, but of the brain's extraordinary adaptability. To learn vision late is to relearn the world itself, to remake perception from the ground up. In the end, the paradox of sight is this: what we assume to be the fullest form of perception may, in some ways, be the most narrow. And what many dismiss as absence may, in truth, be a deeper presence. When I think back to that night, the rain misting down, the locked catwalk door, the fence that stood between me and the waiting Uber, I remember the rhythm of my cane echoing against the pavement. Each tap was more than sound. It was vision. It was certainty. It was proof that I could move forward even when the world around me was closed and unfamiliar. That was sight, though no photons reached my eyes. Science tells us that sight is photons colliding with the retina, bent through the lens, translated into electricity, interpreted by the brain. Philosophy reminds us that sight is not automatic, but learned, that the man who gains vision cannot immediately identify a cube or a sphere without time to connect touch to sight. Experience tells us that perception is not bound by light at all. The blind navigate with proprioception, echolocation, flash sonar, and memory. They build worlds as rich, as complex, and as real as any seen through the eyes. The paradox is that vision, for all its promise, can narrow as much as it expands. Newly sighted individuals sometimes feel disappointed, even betrayed, by their new perception. What was once a three-dimensional panorama of sound and touch becomes a two-dimensional flood of confusing images. The world, once alive in every direction, shrinks into a forward-facing window. And yet, given time, the brain learns. It integrates, translates, transforms chaos into clarity. Sight, then, is not simply the ability to capture light. It is the act of creating meaning. It is the brain's construction of a world from whatever signals it is given. Sometimes those signals are photons. Sometimes they are echoes. Sometimes they are the gentle pressure of a wall beneath the fingertips or the warmth of sunlight on the face. To ask, "What is sight?" is to ask a much deeper question. How do we know the world? The answer is not found in the eye alone, nor in the ear, nor in the skin. It is found in the mind's ability to weave the fragments together, to make sense of the scattered signals, to create from them a coherent, livable reality. And so, sight is not only physical, it is perspective. It is the way we understand our place in the vastness of experience. For some, that perspective comes in color and form. For others, it comes in sound and touch. But in every case, it is not the sense itself that matters most. It is what the sense allows us to know, to remember, to imagine. That night on campus, I did not see the rain or the fence or the car, but I knew them. I perceived them. I crossed the barrier, found my way, and arrived safely home. That was sight. Perhaps not as others know it, but as I know it. And in the end, that is the truest definition of all. Sight is not about what the eyes take in. It is about what the mind makes of it. After all, it's logical.